Today, I am so delighted to be able to introduce you to Sara Brunsvold, and we are here to talk about her second book, but you've probably heard about her first, The Extraordinary Deaths of Mrs. Kipp. And I have to tell you, because of all the people who've talked about it, it is sitting on my to be read pile. The cover is amazing for that one. And it's just gotten so many rave reviews and placed in lots of contests and things like that, which is wonderful. So congratulations on that, Sara. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about yourself, and then we'll start talking about your new book?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the congratulations, and thank you for inviting me to this talk. I've been looking forward to it. So I am talking to you today from the Kansas City metro area, the Kansas side, representing the Kansas side. And I am originally from Missouri, in the Hannibal, Missouri area, which is famous for Mark Twain, the boyhood home of Samuel Clemens. So I was introduced to storytelling and the enduring power of storytelling pretty early in life, and discovered writing like a lot of authors as a kid, and always dreamed of being a novelist, and even went on to get an English degree, and with the thought of someday putting it to use for that purpose. But life has a way of being life, and so I actually did not get serious about writing until 2012,
Oh,
and
wow.
that was when I attended my first writers conference.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, that led to finding a writers group, which led to finding a critique group, which led to more networking and getting a few smaller publication credits under my belt. And the more I did it, the more I wrote, the more I published, and just tried to try different genres on for size and different formats on for size. It just reiterated to me that novel writing specifically was where it was at for me. And so that's what I started to pursue. And in 20, let's see, it was 2018, I was preparing for a writers conference, and had a couple of books that I was planning to pitch to agents. And Carrie, you know this well, when you go to conferences, you always have to have a back pocket idea
Mm.
in case the person that you're meeting with asks, what else do you have?
Yeah.
And that's usually a sign they like you, but they just want a different idea. And a couple of weeks before the conference, I had this wild idea about a young reporter who is forced to take an assignment to go interview a hospice patient. And that book was the one that the agent I was talking to, that's the one she latched onto and said, you need to go write that one. So, and so I did. And that really set me on this journey now. So Mrs. Kipp was my debut. It came out in 2022. And my next one's coming out, it comes out January 16th, 2024, and got a couple more in the hopper. So I'm just excited to be on this path, and excited to make some friendships with readers all over the world.
I love it. And when I think about your books, they're kind of genre benders, I guess. They don't really fit real cleanly in like women's fiction or necessarily romance. What would you call them? Because even from the title, The Extraordinary Deaths of Mrs. Kipp or The Divine Proverb of Streusel, other than making me really hungry, it's kind of, both of them are intriguing, but they don't necessarily scream, oh, this is the type of book I'm picking up, this is what I can expect.
Mm-hmm.
So what would, if I was going to pick up your book for the first time, what would you tell a reader is kind of what they should expect from a Sara Brunsvold book?
Yeah, I think you can expect from a Sara Brunsvold book, it's a contemporary story. So that I think that's one of the defining features of what I write. It's I prefer to read more modern day books, 80s and later. So contemporary would be one aspect of it. I also have a strong heart for intergenerational relationships,
Mm.
and particularly woman to woman. So the Titus to womanhood, the older women teaching the younger women, and just that biblical concept of connecting across generational lines. You'll see that a lot in my stories. And I think that um, is rooted very much in the way that I was raised. So I grew up in a farming family where it was grandpa's farm. Dad managed it, and my brother and I were the help, and we were just that intergenerational connectedness was just I took it for granted as a kid,
Mhm.
and was very, very deeply impacted by that
Yeah.
growing up. And then, so you can expect that. You can expect contemporary real life stories that will center around intergenerational relationships, whether within the same family or with between strangers or between women in the same church. That's what you can expect.
I love that. And I think what I really love about that idea, the intergenerational connection, is I come from a really close-knit family, and that's kind of part of our DNA. But that's something that a lot of people just don't have. We're kind of these independent islands or pockets, but there's something in each of us that we long for, that connection. And so I teach at a university, and one of the things we talk about a lot right now is belonging, and how do we create belonging. And I sometimes smile, even as I recognize that's a deep-seated need, but it's something God placed in us, and that's why he placed us in families. So the fact that that's what you're creating in your books, I think, is beautiful, and something that, if we're not finding it in real life, we still hunger for it, and we hunger for the model for it. And so if we can't find it in real life, sometimes we need that modeled in fiction so that we even know this is what's possible. So as you're creating that, what kind of sparked that? So you get the idea for a hospice, uh, I was going to say victim, but they're not really a victim. It's part of life. Someone who's in hospice and is going to be mentoring this young reporter. Then in your second book, it's someone is going through and they're finding a notebook and kind of getting almost mentored through that. How do you come up with these ideas? Is it just inspiration strikes? How did you come up with that?
Yeah, so real life inspires fiction, and
Yeah.
so in the case of the Mrs. Kipp book, it was an advertisement that I saw that inspired the story. It was for a local hospice program here in Kansas City. They were looking for volunteers to be trained on how to sit at the bedsides of their patients, of their residents,
Oh, wow.
and collect life stories. And all of those stories then would be put in a commemorative book for their loved ones. And I thought, what an amazing way to serve
Wow.
someone else, and to do, to fill that need that they have, to pass on their stories and their legacy.
Mhm.
And at the time, my father-in-law was in hospice care, and so it just kind of struck an especially strong chord with me, that
Yeah.
whole idea. So that's what inspired Mrs. Kipp. The Divine Proverb of Streusel. So in this book, you'll see it's within the same family. The intergenerational aspect is within the same family. So you have the granddaughter, Nikki, who finds among her late grandmother's belongings this notebook that is it's not clear who wrote it, but clearly somebody, a woman in her line somewhere, wrote down not just authentic German recipes from her collection, but also wise sayings to go along with those recipes. So a lot of it drawn from the book of Proverbs. So the author of this journal quotes the book of Proverbs, but then just shares, and you can tell that it's clearly from her life experience, what these verses mean to her, and what she has learned by applying those in her own life. And so, in that way, you kind of have this ghost of a mentor, but it's still that strong legacy, this idea of
Yeah.
passing down wisdom, which of course that's what the book of Proverbs is, right? It's King Solomon, and attempting to pass down these nuggets of wisdom for anyone who is willing to listen to
Yeah.
and to read them. And that was kind of inspired. So the Divine Proverb of Streusel was it's inspired by my own family history, heritage, and story. And the Nikki, one of the reasons why she begins cooking her way through these recipes that she finds in the journal is because she is going through a family crisis with her parent. Her parents have just divorced, and
Mhm.
she's older, she's in her 20s, but just exploring that. How do you navigate through the ripple effects of a family that's been torn apart? And this journal kind of brings her back to her family identity, and that identity, of course, is rooted in faith.
Yeah.
And that was the piece that she needs to figure out, how do I move forward from this? So, and that was very much based on, like I said, my own family story. My parents divorced after 31 years of marriage,
Wow.
and I had a very difficult relationship with my dad after that. And in a lot of ways, this story is kind of parallel to my own journey at that time of just figuring out, what do I do now? What do I do with this pain that has just kind of been dropped in my lap? And how and I hope that's something that readers can identify with. Is family pain is a very unique kind of pain. And God, like you said earlier, God has put us purposefully in a family. So what do you do when that family tie is severed, or is so broken that it's just got jagged edges? How do you reconcile those two things? Like, God has put us in this situation, but it's so painful. So
Yeah.
that inspired the storyline of the Divine Proverb of Streusel.
Wow. There's so much in that. And so many readers are going to be able to relate to different pieces of that. So I have to ask though, as you were going through and writing this, did you try all the recipes? Because the
Oh
book is
yes.
filled with them. And so I've got to think, I enjoy cooking, but I don't always follow a recipe exactly. And so sometimes I'll be experimenting and my husband will be like, why don't you follow it exactly the first time? And did you have any surprises as you were trying some of these recipes, or did you try them all before you put them in the book? Or did you go, oh, this one will just have to be close enough and readers can find out for themselves if it's good or not?
Yeah, so it's kind of a mix of both. So yes, I did cook because even though I grew up with German heritage, we really didn't have a lot of I didn't have a lot of exposure to traditional German dishes for various reasons. And so yes, I did cook my way through these recipes, and in the name of research, I consumed a lot of butter. You're welcome, readers. And it
Butter
was
makes everything better.
it does. Oh my goodness. Butter and cream and all the good stuff. But I wanted to know that I wanted to experience that along with this character, because she's never cooked either, and she has mild success with some of them, which may or may not have been true to life. But then but then there are some recipes that I actually, as I was researching, my aunts had all these family artifacts that I used for inspiration, and there were some recipes among those that I don't know if it was my great grandmother. I don't know where they came from, but there's a cookie recipe in the book that I haven't tried yet because so that's the only one that I didn't try. But all the others, yes, I did make them and force them upon my family, and some of them, but they were all delicious. That was the thing. They were all
Yeah.
so good. Yeah. And
So which is one that you would be like, okay, readers, you need to absolutely try this one because it was amazing.
oh my goodness. Okay, so there's two of them. One is scalloped potatoes, which sounds very ordinary, but German scalloped potatoes are different. They're a whole new level. And my daughter says it smells like Christmas, and she's right. There's a bit of nutmeg in it, and
Ooh.
oh, lots of butter, and it's just so delicious. And you have to use a certain kind of potato, so definitely that one. And then the star of the show, and where the title comes from, is Streuselkuchen. Streusel meaning, the crumbly topping, and Kuchen just meaning cake. So it's a crumb cake. And if you're willing to put in the work, because it is a yeast cake, so, it takes hours because you got to let it rise and all that. But if you're willing to be patient and to try your hand at it. It is so good. This cake, it pairs with coffee very, very nicely. It's a perfect winter recipe or early spring recipe.
I was just making notes. I'm like, okay, I have to go to the copy of the book I have and now make sure that
Yes.
I do those, um, which is going to be so fun. So now take a slight detour. If you could spend a day with another popular author, who would you choose?
Oh man. Man, that's
Yeah,
a
it's kind
hard
of a tricky one,
question.
isn't it?
Oh man, I'm gonna have to narrow this down. Um, so I think I would get along famously, and I think I do get along famously with a fellow contemporary author, Amanda Cox. I think
Oh, yeah,
she would be a delight. I've had the opportunity to spend a few hours with her at a time, but I would love to spend a whole day with her.
yeah,
Um, I think Jamie Jo Wright would be a lot of fun, or Pepper
mhm,
Basham. I mean,
yeah.
they have the greatest personalities, and so I would love to spend honestly any of those, and probably a lot more that I would love to spend
Yeah.
a day with.
All of those would be an amazing day. And so the last question that I'll ask today is, what's one thing, if you could go back to the beginning and tell your younger writing self a piece of advice, what's one thing that you would be like, okay, if I could whisper in your ear as you were starting, here's one piece of advice I wish you'd known and that you could have followed.
Don't be in a hurry. I think that's the advice that I would give is just trust that things will happen when they are supposed to happen, and don't try to force it. Um, but yeah, don't be in a hurry. I think the publishing contract is everybody's dream, but what we don't often see is what comes next. And there's just a lot that you need to be prepared for. A lot of great things, but that journey to the publishing contract is so worth it. And just trust the process, trust the growth that you'll see.
Yeah, and I think you're so right, because we get focused on the end goal and we forget to enjoy the steps along the way and what God's
Yes.
doing in that process. And that applies in so many areas, but I think in writing, it's so much all about that contract that we forget about all the intermediate steps. So your book is coming out on January 16th, and it's going to be available everywhere that readers buy their books. So
Yes.
it looks fantastic. And just for the recipes, even if not for anything else. But this idea of an intergenerational story where wisdom is being passed on from one generation to the next. And I love that idea. As I was doing the research on the book of, so many times it can be from a journal, and the idea that it's a journal of recipes with the proverbs and then life stories woven in. It's such a beautiful way to capture that wisdom being passed on. So thank you so much for joining me today. It was so fun to get to learn more about you and your writing.